The cold won't let up, neither will the fighting, as a conference for Ukraine brings allies and investors here to Paris. Russia continues to pound critical infrastructure. How to talk rebuilding when Moscow's still destroying. We'll ask our panel where priorities lie, who pays for what, and at what point national security interests trump trade and business as usual. And since it's about Ukraine's future we're talking, we'll also be asking how Europe's bloodiest conflict since World War II shifts the balance of power militarily and economically on this continent. How will Europe be different when it's all over? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the winter war effort for Ukraine. Joining us, retired NATO General Jean-Paul Paloméros. He's also former Chief of Staff for the French Air Force. Welcome back to the show. From Warsaw, Maria Zalkina, Head of Regional Security and Conflict Studies at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
He's a former advisor to the Ukrainian government. Boris Naiman is Associate Professor at the University of Paris-Est Créteil. Thank you for being with us from Brussels.
Good evening. Thank you.
And he's covered Ukraine since the days of the Soviet Union. Journalist Julian Mundy. How are you, sir?
I'm fine.
Thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, donor pledges and the frosty sunshine we experienced here in Paris this Tuesday. That's in contrast with the heavy fighting and the scramble that they've been facing the last weeks to keep the power on in eastern and southern Ukraine. France 24's Robert Parsons reports from Mykolaiv.
Hundreds of kilometers of war-damaged electricity cables in need of urgent repair. Since the liberation of the villages east of Mykolaiv in early November, these electricians have been working non-stop. The land around them is mined, a parting gift from the Russians. They're putting their lives at risk, but they are more motivated than ever.
Here, around 60% of cables are damaged. That's why we have so much emergency work to do to restore the electricity supply. We are working segment by segment.
It's laborious work made even harder by the freezing rain. Their trucks struggle to cope with the ankle-deep mud. With the temperature dropping, these electricians are working as hard as they can to restore power to the region. 90% of the villages here are without electricity. Many of them have been without power now for 9 months. Since October, the Russians have pulverized Ukraine's energy infrastructure and its storage facilities. Many of the trucks belonging to Mykolaiv's regional energy company have been destroyed by Russian artillery fire. Before they withdrew from the area, the Russians sacked the depot and trashed what they couldn't take.
It's a picture from the first day after the occupation. Our office was a base for Russian-occupied troops, and you can see what left Russian troops after this visit.
While proud of his teams, Vadim says he's well aware of the scale of the task ahead.
We tried to quickly return electricity to this city, to this village, but after that we have to completely rebuild this network, because we make our work only to deliver electricity to this village, temporarily deliver, and after that we have to rebuild, and we need a big investment.
The total cost for the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war is estimated by the World Bank at around 600 billion euros, and that's just a provisional figure. Who knows how long this war will continue and at what cost?
Yeah, before we talk about the daunting question of rebuilding, Maria Zalkina, can we get kind of a snapshot of what the power situation is in Ukraine this Tuesday? Over the weekend, the whole world watched when the city of Odessa was out in the dark.
Actually, this is a critical situation, despite the fact that people are still very resistant. I mean, it makes them even more deterrent towards Russian aggression. But the real situation is that both planned and emergency blackouts all over Ukraine are taking place. And the most important challenge right now for Ukrainian electricians and energy companies is not only to be able to restore and repair everything on daily basis, like it's a rolling basis for their work, but also to have enough equipment. Because right now Russia is targeting not only power plants, but mainly transformers, in order to make it not possible for power plants to distribute the electricity, even if it is produced around the country. And these transformers, they are, let's say, of a specific. Is a specific equipment which can be found not only in couple of countries in the EU. So we have a couple of challenges, and I think that our partners might support us should support us much stronger in terms of supporting electricians with equipment to repair what's going on.
Because it's been amazing how, in some instances, they've been able to restore power so quickly.
I'm originally from Stanitsa Luhanska, which was a frontline checkpoint from Ukraine-controlled part of Luhansk region in the very east of Ukraine. And I remember very well that the same situation took place in 2014, 2015, when our electricians on local ground were doing the same job, but just the scope of destruction caused by Russian artillery fire at that time, not just by missiles like it is now. The scope was smaller. But I would say that our energy companies have had already such an experience. The problem now is with lack of people to do the same job all around the country, with the winter period, because people need to have some heating at their apartments and warm water supply, and of course equipment, transformers and cables.
All right, so the need for transformers, the need for cables, we also heard the need for generators. And as you were saying there, Maria, the need for electricians to help restore power. Ukraine's First Lady and Prime Minister, among those in attendance here in Paris, pressing the case for Ukraine, they along with representatives of 70 nations listening as the French president spelled out objectives and laid blame.
After its recent military defeats, the heart of Russia's offensive is plunging the Ukrainian people into despair, attacking in an unacceptable way civilian infrastructure, cutting water and electricity, and plunging the population into darkness and cold. And so we're mobilizing to help them resist.
At this conference, Boris Neumann, I suspect they were talking about sending equipment. They weren't yet talking about sending electricians, were they?
I don't think this is a classical conference to collect money and pledge what should be put on the table to finance the reconstruction. But I'm sure, as it was said, that what is needed is a task force, especially on energy, to bring together the main company of producing electricity in Europe and ask them to send both material and manpower to reconstruct much quickly the infrastructure in Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah, they discussed something called the Paris mechanism. Make it so that you're able to fast track the sending of supplies to whatever sector is urgently needed. You listen to that, Boris Neumann, do you think to yourself, it's not just Ukraine, but all of Europe that's involved now in the war actively?
I think there is still a difference between, let's say, Central Europe that is very committed and pushing very much, and Germany and France, unfortunately, moving more slowly on the track. But I hope, and we all hope, that in the next weeks, with the situation, especially during the winter, France and Germany will take the lead because they have much higher financial and manpower capacity for rebuilding Ukraine.
General Paloméros, no winter lull in the fighting, and you heard Emmanuel Macron's strong words at the outset of that conference. We've had fierce battles that have been raging in the front lines. Our team is near the town of Bakhmut. Over the weekend, the exiled mayor of Melitopol saying HIMARS rockets hit a recreation area on the city's outskirts that was housing Russian servicemen. We don't have an exact figure on casualty tolls, but when you look at that map, first off, okay, there was talk perhaps of a winter lull. That's definitely not happening. But secondly, your thoughts on, are you surprised at how intense it's been militarily?
Not really, because both sides have some interest to keep on fighting. Obviously, the Russians have their own aim, and certainly to keep the south region, if I may say so. They have left Kherson, but they want to keep, obviously, Crimea and perhaps some part of the Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts. On the other hand, the Ukrainians know that their great strength is really to go on offensive, to keep the momentum. They cannot stay and retrench. So they have to push, they have to prevent Russian, obviously, to take over some cities like Bakhmut, which is symbolic, but very important at the end of the day. And then if they can, to go around, I would say, the southwest and perhaps push a little bit.
We're looking at that map there, the city of Melitopol. Why is it so important?
It's important because this is where they can make a breakthrough. I would suspect they cannot jump the Dnipro River, so they have to go around. And Melitopol is a fine target, but they must be very cautious. They don't want to destroy the city as the Russians have done. And now what the Ukrainians need is really both the civilian part of the equation, the groups. And this is really an urgent need, but as well to keep on providing artillery, shells, and air defense. And we have seen that the U.S. are considering to send their most advanced Patriot system.
We just have an urgent dispatch that has come through in the last minutes. The Pentagon saying it is sending a battery of Patriot missiles. What does that mean?
Well, that means this is the most powerful air defense systems in the inventory of the U.S. forces. It needs training, so the Ukrainians. This is a real good news for the Ukrainians. They have asked for that for a while. So far, the U.S. have deployed that in NATO countries, in Poland. But nowadays, if they have decided, and we will see that in a few hours, to send that will need training, but that will be a great added value for Ukrainian air defense.
Julian Nundy?
Well, yes. I mean, what the general is saying is, I was talking to a friend in Kiev this afternoon who's former military, he's retired military. And he was saying very much the same things. He was saying that Melitopol is important because it leads, it's on the way to Crimea. It could make Russian supply lines much, much weaker if they get Melitopol back. And it also gives them an opportunity to push further south to go to Berdyansk on the Azov Sea.
And whether we're talking about the civilian aspect of it, and we'll talk more about it in this discussion, or the military aspect, when you have this announcement of the Patriot missiles coming through, again, it's that another step closer to NATO being actively involved?
Well, I think I will stand corrected if the general thinks so. I think NATO is already involved to such a large extent that adding more sophisticated, better arms makes a difference on the ground, but it doesn't really make much of a difference to the balance of forces in this conflict.
Is that how the Kremlin sees it?
I don't think anyone really knows how the Kremlin sees things.
Well, they are at war, so it's legitimate it's air defense. It's a defensive. They are not giving the most advanced ground-to-ground missiles, long-range offensive ground missiles. We are giving them the ability to protect their land, to protect their people, to protect their sovereignty, to protect their electric power, to protect their life.
The former UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he's still a member of Parliament, and he says providing Ukraine with air defense is not enough. Let's listen to what he had to say in the Commons.
Also, to take out the launch sites of those missiles and drones by supplying the Ukrainians with the use of longer range missile systems such as ATACMS, because that is the way truly to protect our Ukrainian friends and to bring the war to an end as soon as possible.
Paloméros, the arrival of these Patriot missiles, does that answer the request there of Boris Johnson?
Well, perhaps, but we must remember that as far as I know, the British forces, they have been asking for more air defense assets in the past, and they never achieved a real capability, progress in that field. So Mr. Johnson has a short memory in my view on that.
Has a short memory in that
Yeah,
view.
I think so.
Boris Nyman?
From what I know, Europe in themselves, they don't have a long range, I'm talking, air defense, but I'm not a military specialist. So they rely on the US for the defense, for this kind of. I think there is a kind of division of labor here. Europe will take care most of the reconstruction and is going to be on track for the reconstruction of Ukraine and will finance it. But as the financing going on and the reconstruction is going on, you need to defend what's going to be reconstructed, because there is no way Europe is putting money in the reconstruction if the Russians continue destroying in the same time the infrastructure. So here is a very important thing with the Patriot, as you mentioned, is that Ukraine needs a very strong air defense in order that missiles are not destroying anymore the essential infrastructure in Ukraine.
Maria Zolkina, how is Ukrainian air defense doing? We mentioned Odessa earlier. The Russians sent through, I think, those Iranian drones. They sent 15 of them, and 10 were intercepted, but unfortunately not the other 5.
So as of now, Ukrainian air defense system is doing much better than we expected at the beginning of large-scale invasion. Of course, it's amazing that with low capacities and actually old-style air defense system, Ukraine is hitting up to 80% of missiles, but still 20-25% are reaching their targets. And the most I would say, effective way to contribute or to invest into, let's say, reconstruction of Ukraine is to prevent destruction of critical infrastructure and civilian buildings. And for that reason, Ukraine is begging actually since the February to strengthen Ukrainian air defense forces by specific Western new modern systems in order to at least secure for the winter period the critical infrastructure objects like heating stations, power plants, transformers.
Let me ask you, Maria, when you think back to the opening of the war and that appeal by President Zelensky for a no-fly zone over Ukraine that went unheeded, how much have things evolved when it comes to Ukraine's relationship with its allies?
Ukrainian air defense forces have done so far their best to close the sky over Ukraine with capacities they have. And actually, we understand that the no-fly zone was not provided to Ukraine and most probably will not be provided to Ukraine until this stage of the war is over. And that's why we are moving really closely to this goal to be reached by Ukrainian air defense forces on their own, but with the usage of Western systems like Patriots.
And that announcement by the Pentagon of that first battery of Patriots coming your way, your reaction to that?
I think it's well awaited, and according to different sources or announcements, let's say, from Ukrainian side, which were done already. So it's highly likely to be a reality in the coming weeks. And of course, it will ease the situation for civilian population in Ukraine.
So here we are. Would you have believed, we're going on 10 and a half months now since the start of this conflict, General Paloméros, that we would be at this point right now?
No. No, I didn't think. At once, as a lot of people, to be frank, I thought that the Red Army was so powerful that despite the courage of the Ukrainians, they will perhaps not invade the whole Ukraine, but a large part of it. So, and going for Kiev was a key element of that.
Last week's explosions that took place, one of them 200 kilometers from Moscow.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to that?
Well, that means that the Ukrainians are very resilient. They are very innovative. They are very creative. They are able to restore, to upgrade certain systems like drones, to provide them with capability, offensive capability. This is amazing. But this is the benefit of what has been done since 2014, when we realized that, we, NATO, the US and NATO realized that it was the time to support Ukrainian forces in their modernization, in their transformation. So it's not by chance. The Ukrainians are clever. They know what they are fighting for, and they are very motivated, obviously. And they are able to use the best technologies, including on older systems. This is really a great lesson out of this war so far.
So, Julian Nundy, it brings us back to the question at the outset, which is how in do you go, whether you're a government or a private investor, when all this is, of course, still a military battle?
Do you mean for reconstruction? I don't think anyone is seriously thinking of reconstructing until there's some form of peace. What they are doing is they're repairing buildings that can be repaired, especially apartment blocks which can be restored because they need them to house people. They need them to house their own residents, they need them to house refugees. And I gather that that's what is happening, is they're repairing a lot on the ground that can be repaired. What is badly damaged, they're just forgetting about for the time being. And I'm sure that will remain so until there's some real peace.
Are you surprised at the way that NATO allies have come together on this? We heard last week Emmanuel Macron being praised by Joe Biden when he went to Washington for that state visit because he was having this conference here.
Not really. In fact, we heard a lot when the Russians started building up a year ago on the borders of Ukraine that NATO was beginning to send arms, but they have been sending in arms for several months. It was particularly France, Turkey, US, of course, and Britain. Turkey was sending in the drones, which made a great difference at the beginning of the war for the Ukrainians, the Bayraktar drones. And there was already a build-up of defensive weapons long before the invasion actually started. And so what has happened since then has been to my mind, a logical extension of that policy.
And of course, now we get into the question of what's needed next. At that conference, in his address by video link, the president of Ukraine spelling out a wish list of six things that were needed. They, of course, included air defense and things like generators, but also things that seem more personal and practical, like LED lamps to reduce the country's electricity shortfall.
50 million of such LED lamps will allow to preserve at least 1 gigawatt of power. Considering that the average deficit in our system is around 2.5 gigawatts, this project will significantly help.
Of course, I call them LEDs. They're LEDs in English. I'm speaking French there. There it is in a nutshell, Boris Neumann. A shortfall of 2.5 gigawatts, and Ukraine has to figure out ways to make it up. And one of them is better light bulbs.
Yeah, I've been doing research on the efficiency of Ukrainian enterprises, the cost of energy compared to their turnover, and it's true that in Ukraine you can produce in a much better way by using less electricity, and it's interesting that even the president is aware, President Zelensky is aware that there's a lot of capacity of higher efficiency in Ukrainian economy. However, I would like to underline something that was said just before. Of course, global reconstruction will not take place immediately. However, much of what the Ukrainian is needed at the moment is a financial strong support, because there is no taxes collected, there is no money. So the needs in the budget is around 10 billions every month in order just to make the economy functioning normally. So we have to figure out that this financial support is at the moment really essential, and is a kind of reconstruction of the economy by making the economy surviving the war period.
Boris, this call for financial support, and also from the private sector that we've been hearing, it comes as though Ukraine, which has changed so much since 2013, 2014, but still there are those hesitating. They point to corruption indexes that list Ukraine towards the bottom of the list of countries you can do business with. How do you convince investors? How do you convince public donors?
Well, I think Ukraine is moving fast, because just yesterday, the Ukrainian government decided to dismiss the administrative procurer in the Kiev Oblast, and who was blocking a lot of projects, and responsible for some of the corruption. I think what is going on now in Ukraine is a very large institutional changes that the country never experienced before. So we are in a process of changing actually most of the responsibilities and the what we call in economic institutional reforms. Deep institutional reform are taking place. So what it means is that the judiciary system is now able to control any misuse of money in the Ukrainian economy, in the Ukrainian state, which is a big change at the moment, because there was a large problems actually last decade. So these changes are taking place very quickly. And I think the road that is open to the integration to the EU is the main reason for this changing also, because if you have a road for changes, it is clear that Ukraine is able to make the main institutional reform needed.
Deep changes, Mario Zolkina, deep enough? Again, you heard Boris Nyman spell out that there is this budget shortfall with no taxes, of course, being raised right now.
Of course, there is a serious deficit of taxes, but still Ukrainian business try to do their best. And even I, being, for instance, right now abroad, are still paying taxes in Ukraine. And when it comes to the situation with the budget, to the situation with using the money which are coming from abroad, so I would remind that Ukraine has established the full-fledged anti-corruption system, which started about 5 years ago. It's full-fledged functioning. I mean, anti-corruption bureau, everything. And it was like the part of our integration with the European Union. And right now, even in the times of the war, Ukraine is starting another stage of judicial reform, exactly because the civil society in Ukraine and experts, at least in Ukraine, understand very well that unless the judicial reform will be completed despite the war, we will hardly be able in 2 or 3 years, when the large reconstruction projects and investments should come to Ukraine, we will hardly be able to wait for those like flows of money. So I think the understanding is really present in Ukraine, and we are pushing hard from the expert side in cooperation with our international partners to make a reality a judicial reform in Ukraine to be finished actually now.
We've just had the 30th anniversary, Julian Nundy, of the fall of the Soviet Union. When did Ukraine stop functioning like a former Soviet state, or is it still one?
I think it's started to stop functioning like a Soviet state at the time of the Orange Revolution in 2004, 2005. That was when, under President Yushchenko at the time, Viktor Yushchenko, they adopted a more sort of outward-looking vision towards Europe rather than to to Russia. And I think from those days on, there was a regression when Viktor Yanukovych was elected president in 2010. When he was overturned 4 years later, then I think the process resumed. But it has become a very different society from its Soviet roots, if you can call them roots.
Yeah, and we saw militarily as one of the ways in which there's been big reforms. And would Ukraine have been able to withstand the Russian onslaught if they still had that very top-down way of functioning their military?
No, I was of NATO transformation in 2014, and when we saw this blow in Ukraine and Crimea, and I found that our friends, Ukrainian friends, they really understood and they knew that it will happen again. They were really convinced that it could happen again. So from that moment, they have done everything they could to transform their military forces and, in fact, to increase their overall resilience. This is a great lesson out of this year of conflict. I am amazed with the resilience of the Ukrainian, able to restore internet, able to restore electricity despite the very tough strikes. So yes, definitely there has been a transformation supported by NATO, supported by the US, but that was the will of the Ukrainian that made the difference. Because we could not have done anything without this will, and so.
I know there are French companies who've long done business in Ukraine, particularly in the IT sector. But with what's going on now and that resilience that you described, what's the role of the private sector?
Well, very much, very high. You see that the satellite link was provided by the private sector.
By Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. I mean, this is a kind of a new way of thinking of how to build the resilience. And this is true as well for internet, and a lot of private companies have allowed the Ukrainian to save their data abroad, this kind of things, including the Bank of Ukraine. So the Ukrainian have very well understood the utility, the importance of building a strong private public partnership.
Boris Nyman, on that score, what's the most important thing to come out, would you say, of this Paris conference?
As always, in this kind of conference, you have countries that committed some pledge. I mean, they're committed to give some money, and then it's afterward you have to see if this is really realized. So you have to follow it and see if the money that is promised will be effectively sent. I think the first most important thing that is achieved is to put everybody together around the table and understand that it's only together that the reconstruction of Ukraine could be financed quickly. And that's the essential, because when you have about 700 billions US dollars estimated by the World Bank, you need everybody to come together to finance that. And I think this kind of conference are important for bringing together the donors, and that's the main step that I see at the moment.
When you think back to reconstruction, Julian Nundy, and other major wars, places like Iraq, Afghanistan, there's always a bit of wariness when you open the business pages, people wondering about rivalries between allies.
Yes, the Ukrainians, as I understand it, have already been dividing up the country as to who is going to rebuild which region. One version I've heard is that Australia will be dealing with the Luhansk province in the Donbass, whereas Germany will be dealing with Donetsk. So they are already apparently trying to designate countries to deal with different parts of Ukraine.
Have you heard the same, Maria Zalkina?
I think that we have to distinguish between long-term reconstruction projects, which are not possible before the occupation, liberation of Ukrainian territory from the Russian occupational forces, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the short-term reconstruction support, which is actually decided to be provided today in the Paris conference, because this amount of money, which was considered today or agreed actually today, it has to be supportive for Ukraine until end of March. So it's very important that this precise decision to be implemented really quickly, and that this money to support energy infrastructure, I mean those very basic things like transformers and cables, to be provided to Ukraine not at the end of March but during winter as soon as possible. And here I think it might be a bit challenging for almost 46 countries which agreed to support Ukraine with this couple of billions of euro during winter period, to do it quickly and smoothly. That's a challenge, but I hope they will be able to do that with understanding how important is that for Ukrainian civilians.
How do you do it?
How do they do that? It depends on national procedures, because actually it will depend on how national governments and national parliaments will decide how quick they will decide that their part of within this couple of billion of euros, will be sent to Ukraine. So it depends on national authorities, actually.
Boris Diamond, we had the European Union, which had one hurdle lifted this Tuesday with Hungary lifting a veto threat on financial aid for Ukraine. How do you see the roles of different countries when it comes to what happens next?
I think it's we are in democratic countries, and I agree with Marine. You need to discuss, all the countries need to discuss at the parliament level and so on. But this 18 billions decided now the European Union level is a financial support that is essential. Now, what could be said is that France and Germany could do much better quickly in supporting all the energy package that is just discussed at the moment, because they are the two countries having most of the capacities in terms of transformers, manpower, also cables. So I suppose that a first, quick move would be from the French and German initiative at the moment.
Yeah, and one of those aspects, and we talked about it on this very set on Monday with the head of the U.S. delegation, who's the Deputy Energy Secretary, is countries like the U.S. and France working together on the question of nuclear power. There are 15 civilian reactors in Ukraine on 5 different sites. We had the Prime Minister of Ukraine this Tuesday saying that the IAEA is pledged to him to send missions to all of those sites. When it comes to nuclear, what should be done? How do you proceed? And again, there's those blurred lines between what is civilian, getting the power running, and what is the national security threat of fighting around Zaporizhzhia, for instance.
Well, Zaporizhzhia is an issue by itself. More largely, to your question, I think they need protection. Obviously, they need air defense as well. We never know. But in Zaporizhzhia, this is really a tough issue and very precise at this time for the Ukrainian to see how far they can go. But the agency is a good and honest broker, if I may say so, and perfectly suited to this situation. If the agency can take part and place in many of those places, on all these places, that will make it more safer, I would say, and seeing from the Russian as a kind of neutral ground, hopefully.
Julian Nundy, the role of the UN nuclear watchdog here?
Well, it's crucial because they are the experts. They've been very courageous so far. They left a team in Zaporizhzhia a few months ago, and now they're planning to go to the other power stations as well. They are. I was watching television this afternoon, and the head of the agency was saying that he's still talking to the Russians, and that they're talking on a technical level, and on the technical level, everything is being sensibly handled. So he was moderately optimistic.
Are you moderately optimistic, Maria Zolkina?
I think that at some point Russia will be pushed to leave actually the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because they have seen that there is no reaction to their nuclear blackmailing on the side of neither of Ukraine nor of the Western countries. No one is treating that it should serve as some kind of red line not to touch, let's say, occupied territories. And that's why they were cornered to go into negotiations with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And Russians had no chance to stay like without any support in Chernobyl zone, which was also occupied, by the way. I will remind our listeners. And the same story might happen around Zaporizhzhia, especially taking into regard that Melitopol is being targeted, that Ukraine is preparing to counteroffensive in another part of Kherson region and Zaporizhzhia region. So altogether, these military and political factors might make Russians at some point leave Zaporizhzhia power plant.
Do Ukrainians really believe that Vladimir Putin can declare victory and retreat?
They have already retreated from Chernihiv, from Kiev, from Kharkiv, from Kherson. So they are defeated and they are retreating, actually. So everything is, unfortunately for Ukrainian civilians, but everything is still being decided on the front line. And Melitopol, which you talked about earlier, is so important exactly because this is the main logistical military hub of Russian forces on continental part of Ukraine right now. They're gathering all the forces, all the arms, soldiers who are brought there after mobilizations in Melitopol. And after that, they're distributing them in different directions to the front line. That's why these bases are being heated. And it will influence, of course, Russia's, let's say, whether Russia will be ready to negotiate about Zaporizhzhia.
Ukraine, which wants all of its territorial integrity, and Melitopol, if it's taken, means that there is an even easier path to going to Crimea. How does NATO feel about Ukraine perhaps making a move for Crimea?
Well, Ukraine is a sovereign country. We have decided to support Ukraine because it was in danger and it was attacked by a major UN power, member of the Permanent Security Council. So it's for the Ukrainians to decide. But I'm sure that Mr. Zelensky will be very wise, and depending on the situation, he will consider the price of going that way. He have said that. We understand, and there is a political dimension to that. It's fully understandable. The Ukrainians are suffering so much so far. Who could dictate them their behavior? This is for them to decide, and at a certain stage to go around the negotiation table with one great issue, great question: what kind of security arrangement, guarantee they will ask, and I would suspect it will be NATO.
Julian Nundy?
Well, I think we have to remember that this war really started in 2014, when Russia took over Crimea, and then got the rebellion going in the Donbass. And maybe if the European Union and NATO and the rest of the West had reacted a little more strongly at the time, we would not be in the situation we're in today. I think that's when the that's when the problem started, and that's where the West went wrong, and that it was not firm enough.
Boris Naiman, this conference in Paris, it's to lay the groundwork for the day when, as General Palomero says, the Ukrainians want to sit down and the Russians want to sit down to end the war. Are we closer to that day?
I think there is a consensus for most of countries that are, let's say, democratic and discussing the war actually, that until Ukraine is not liberated from the Russian occupation, there's no negotiation. I mean, the negotiation starts at the moment when the Russian forces are pushed out of a sovereign state. I think this is important because we tried several times, as it was said just a moment, to negotiate with Russia in Georgia and also for Syria and now in Ukraine since 2014. And we have to acknowledge that, especially for France, and the Normandy format was a failure. So negotiating without this base of, this consensus of getting the country free and respecting also the Budapest Agreement that Russia signed on the sovereignty of Ukraine and not changing the borders is essential. So I think the negotiation will start at the very moment when Russia acknowledged that it was a mistake to invade Ukraine.
Maria Zolkina, one final word on this.
Ukraine has very clearly understood the mistake which was done in 2014 in terms of trust towards Russia's political promises signed in Minsk, for instance, and all these talks which led to nothing. So right now, it's very important to build new security architecture in the region, and that can be effective only in case that Ukrainian territory will be liberated, that Crimea will not serve as a military basis neither for Russian land forces nor for Russian Black Sea Fleet and for nuclear arms as well. And when Russian army will be not able to invade neither Ukraine nor Baltic states, Poland, no one actually. So it means withdrawal of Russian forces from entire Ukraine. So that's the goal of Ukraine.
And we'll have to leave it there. Maria Zolkina, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Warsaw. Boris Nyman in Brussels, Julian Nundy, Jean-Paul Paloméros. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.